The art of shopping is probably one of the most important skill sets you can gather today. Platforms like Sketchfab, Mini Factory Scan the World, the Unreal Engine Marketplace, and the Quixel Bridge, just to name a few, are some really excellent sources to gather 3D geometry and materials. The difficult part, though, of working with these is figuring out what kinds of objects and assets to download it in the first place. So behind the curtain here, of course, is going to be the intellectual territory and the ideas that you're considering and aware of. But there are some tips that can really help this process, particularly the distinction between stylized and realistic modeling. For example, this Shiba dog you can see on screen, this is a stylized Shiba dog. It is not trying to be realistic. It has no fur. It has a perfectly rounded geometry. And so if you were to try to blend this or include it in a scene like here, it would not look like it worked, or it wouldn't necessarily belong stylistically in that environment. There's some really good examples of work that transcends these normal boundaries, but in general, if you're working in realistic modeling techniques and realistic rendering, you're going to want to make sure that your assets are also in that same kind of style. So that's the first thing to really be aware of, because you'll notice that on the Epic Marketplace in particular, this kind of distinction is really obvious, especially when you get into game spaces, which many games are stylized. And so they will have a particular aesthetic baked into their geometry and their materials. You can be extremely picky, and you should be extremely picky on these platforms. So many free assets are available, like the Quixel Bridge. This is a really great resource because you know that what you're going to get will be a high quality asset. Some of the stuff you may find on Sketchfab, it may look alright at first, but once you get behind the curtain of it, you can see it's actually rather messy. Some of the things that can really help with this, though, are these icons like the staff picks, and just realizing how many downloads or things they already have. The trade-off, though, is that if something is really high quality and has a lot of downloads, that means a lot of other people are also using it. So that may hamper some of the potential originality of your work. On Sketchfab in particular, I like to search by new, actually. So I just will search by most recent and have the downloadable option checked. And this is lets you see what is recently uploaded, which is really great. The quality, though, is going to be rather spotty, but things like this phone, this actually looks pretty alright. You can even just tell by the preview. I haven't even clicked on it. It looks pretty alright. It actually looks much better than, say, this piece here, which isn't even textured. And it's stylized and has some interesting geometry, but it doesn't look finished yet. The important thing, though, again, is to just be very picky about what you end up downloading. So many assets are available that most of the work now in this kind of field is not so much making the assets, it's finding them. And so it just shifts where the work is. Very similar to the movie making process, where a production designer would be sourcing props. You can think about this as a prop house, and you're really just trying to source the highest quality props. If you're doing a realistic story, you want to make sure that your props are realistic as well. If you're doing a stylized story, make sure everything fits into that stylization. I will say, with regards to stylized work, that in general you're going to have to make much more of it yourself as custom assets. Once you define an art style, like something in Overwatch or any of the Blizzard work, you'll realize that for it to make sense together, it all has to have the same modeling and texture language built into it. So two different types of stylization may not even be compatible with each other. A lot of times, though, this kind of work and these kind of models will just require you to try them. I'm just browsing here quickly. I'm noticing a few of these models that are pretty high quality. These look like photo scans. And to just take a look at it, I middle-clicked the asset. And as it's loading in, we'll eventually get a 3D preview of that. And you can see that this one is a pretty decent quality. It's obvious that it's a photo scan of a stone model. But if that's something you want, this seems like a great opportunity to grab that. I think it's just courteous if you're going to download something to follow the creator, and make sure you copy the CC text, which is available here, the credit the creator text. Just to be sure that if you want, wherever you can give credit to them, you will give credit to them. In general, though, some of the best resources are going to be, if you want 3D printing materials or classical architecture scans or sculptural scans, the Mini Factory Scan the World is a fantastic resource. Most of these are really high quality, but sometimes you'll find things that aren't necessarily the greatest. So just be aware of that. Another really fancy resource is the Kitbash 3D, and this has been up and coming. It's been really exploding in recent history, and they have a lot of these different environment kits kind of categorized. So if we take a look, for example, at the Goliath pack, you'll see that this has a full 3D kit. It's very expensive, but you could imagine perhaps purchasing this and sharing it amongst a number of people. And then you'd have access to all of these digital models of buildings available in a number of different platforms based off of whatever you might be doing. Those are really good. The Epic Games Marketplace, again, it's rather hit or miss. And a lot of times the risk here is just a risk of time loss. These kind of assets are free, but they require you to open them up, see what's in them. I encourage you to do so. Packs like this, which have a ton of variety and even have pre-made maps and scenes built out, can give you a lot of really potent inspiration. You can even tell just by these previews some of the quality of the meshes. This fabric looks really nice from this render, for example, so you know that that asset is probably pretty good. In general, though, the art of shopping is all about honing your artistic eye. It's about realizing and recognizing beauty in different places. It just takes practice too. You may not be amazing at it at first. You may not see the potential of this wild photogrammetry scan that I'm mousing over now until you open it up and experiment with it a bit. In general, some of the search tools you might try. Again, Sketchfab is probably the largest, highest quality 3D model database that I've found recently, but just searching by the architecture tab can yield all sorts of really interesting results. Some of them are photo scans, some of them are fully texture mapped out architectural models. Many of them are school projects from different students, and so you can just see how other people around the world are building their digital environments. All in all, the really important takeaway from this is to think through your narrative that you are trying to world build out. It's an exercise of storytelling. It's an exercise of finding the key details and including them. A really great resource for starting exercises in world building and scene building is the website FilmGrab. It takes movies and breaks them into series of stills, and you can see how they are world building out these films. Something like the 2017 Ghost in the Shell movie has so much world building built into the environments. And so each one of these shots starts to tell a story without any dialogue. Unfortunately, the movie itself and the writing of the dialogue is not very successful, but the stills from the movie and the different scenes and costumes and sets that are embedded into the different stills is very evocative. So I encourage you to take a look through some of these as potential inspiration for some of your environment builds.